This is part 18 in a series of videos in which I'm attempting to repair and restore this MADAS mechanical calculator. Apologies for the length of this series. When I first picked this project off the pile, I'd expected it to take a week or so to complete. That was about 3 months ago, and this has presented a never-ending stream of issues that I've had to deal with. So it was in a very poor state when I got it. It had been taken apart, had various damage from previous repair attempts, but I now believe there are some parts missing. In the previous video I was looking at the reasons why the machine won't terminate an automatic division cycle, so it would go through the entire division, but it would never switch the motor off. It just kept cycling through the last column. I put it down to the fact that the release mechanism needs to latch into position, and I was trying to figure out why it wasn't doing that. Now, I've looked at it some more since then, and I've had some helpful comments from someone who was watching the video. He's got a calculator like this, but his is the mechanical, the hand-driven version, so it is different in, unfortunately, the important aspects of how it deals with the end of division cycle. But I think I've possibly figured out where the missing parts go, but I don't know what they look like or how they're supposed to be fitted. So I'll explain what I found, and if anyone has one of these with the motor drive or knows anything about it or has any documents or drawings, then I would appreciate it. So this all starts off over here, so I'll move the camera over and we'll look at the plunger, and I'll explain how the machine is put into an automatic cycle. Okay, so normally this gear wheel I've got covered in tape here so I can drive it without taking all the skin off my fingers. This is normally driven from the electric motor, but I can't use the electric motor here, firstly because you need to have the calculator in its outer case for the motor to work, but also I don't want to drive it on the motor when it might potentially lock up. I can do a lot of damage. But the way this works is normally you would push down this plunger, and that will cause the start of a cycle. Now if it's a single cycle like an additional subtraction, the calculator would just cycle once and then stop. Part of the mechanism it operates, you can just see the end of a lever down here, a silver bit poking out, and that's a rocker lever that is pushed down through the central shaft of the plunger. It's pivoted in the middle, operates a rod at the back, and that starts the electric motor and also operates the division and multiplication mechanism at the other end of the machine, which we'll look at in a few minutes. The other thing that's on here, which is hard to see, is this disc here has got a slot cut out in it that currently is aligned with this plate. This plate extends into the slot, and this disc goes down when you press down the plunger, and then when you start to rotate the machine, the slot effectively comes out of alignment with this plate, and then this edge of the disc runs on the underside of the plate and it holds the plunger down. But of course every cycle, every rotation, the slot passes back past this plate. So to stop the machine popping back out of drive and terminating any automated cycle, we have this plate here, which has got a hook at the top and a hook at the bottom, and as long as this lever, this silver lever, is held down, this hook sits underneath it. It pulls down this lever, which holds down this disc, so even when the slot is passing the plate, it can't pop back up as long as this plate is held down. And that just means that once every rotation there's the chance for the machine to terminate any cycles. So that's where we kind of run into the problem. I'll move the camera back to the other end of the machine and I'll show you where the problem lies with this automatic division. Okay, so we've looked at this mechanism before. There's a lot of damage to the various parts in here. And in the previous video I was speculating that this spring plate, you can't see at the moment, there's a spring plate down here, was responsible for latching the end of division, because we can't have the cam operating in sync with the slot in the plate or the disc I showed, otherwise it would terminate every time the cam operated. So this mechanism somehow has to latch at the right part of the cycle and then stay latched until the end of the cycle is reached, and it should only do that in the last column and after the division is completed. But what's happening is it's doing the entire division successfully, it's going through all the phases. I know that all the various columns are correctly timed because the carries and the borrows ripple through the entire columns successfully, and it won't do that if they're out of sync. And it goes through the three main phases of the division successfully, so it subtracts repeatedly, it underflows, it recovers from the underflow, and then it moves the carriage along, and it does all that properly without binding or jamming up. The problem comes when it gets to the last column and it's supposed to terminate the division. Now, there are three things that can hold the machine into its run mode. One is the disc I showed earlier, but to stop the cycle ending when the slot in that disc passes the locking plate, there's a hook down here, can't really see it, but when that's held up by this plate, that's the plate that this lever controls, it prevents the machine exiting run mode. And then there's another lever on the same shaft that operates, that's operated by the carriage movement. We can ignore that, that's working fine and it's not really involved here. But what we need to happen is for, at the end of the cycle, we need this plate to move up and to be latched into position until the end of cycle occurs, and that's not what's happening. I think I figured out how it's supposed to do this, but I don't know how to make it actually work. So I'll go through this and I'll continue to work on this, but if anyone's got any photos of the inside of one of these or knows how this is supposed to operate, I'd greatly appreciate it. So I'll move the camera a bit closer and then I'll explain what's going on here. Okay, I won't run the machine because that will kind of complicate what I'm trying to explain. Things will keep moving around. But what we're trying to achieve here is to have this latch up into this position when we rotate this indicator wheel into the number 2 position when it's in the final column. So we're in the final column, and when we're in the final column, the end of this screw, you can see the head of, pushes this plate along. So if I move the carriage to the right, you'll see this plate moves back, and with it in this position, the cam, which you can just see on this shaft here, which is attached to this number wheel, if it spins around, I can't spin it round because it's on a shaft that's attached to the machine. If you imagine this spins around, the cam will clear this part of this plate. This plate's got two sections, a raised section here and a recessed section, but the cam will run in the recessed section and effectively will do nothing. So in other words, it won't cause this to move, it'll just sit where it is. But when we get into the final column, this plate moves across and now the cam will engage with this raised section. This lever here is the manual end of division cycle, so what it does is it causes this plate to move up and it disengages the hook that holds the machine into the division cycle. So we effectively want the machine to be pressing this lever at the right time, but it isn't. I thought the issue was down here somewhere with this spring, but I no longer believe that's the case. I think what's supposed to happen here is when the machine reaches the last column, I think there's some parts missing. I think this is supposed to be pushed across on a spring. Not this spring, this is a return spring. I think there's supposed to be a spring trying to push it across to the left. Because what happens if you take this lever, it would normally be sitting higher than this, and if we look at the front panel, if we look at the inside of the front panel, obviously this needs cleaning yet, we see there's a witness mark here on the panel. So that's caused by this shoulder. So that's caused by this shoulder on this pushing up against the inside of the panel. which means that this lever position is normally up flush with the panels. If I put a straight edge across here, we can figure out exactly where this lever would normally sit. So it would normally be sitting there. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this now with my hands in the way. But when we get to the point of the cycle where this cam operates, which is there, then it's pushing this lever up where we want it. And not only that, but this lever will now go further across. So whereas before it was hitting the side of this latch, this lever, with it in the correct position and in the last column, this can now pass all the way across, and this lever is now effectively latching this in position. So I can take the can out and it will stay where it is. In fact, if you pull this, it won't come back down again. So if the machine was to now carry on rotating, then it would terminate the cycle as it's supposed to. So I think what's supposed to be happening is this will come across when we reach the final column, but with the cam not in the active position, such as there, when it's just subtracting, then this plate will be in the down position, so the machine will carry on rotating. But when this rotates, so it will rotate from a 0 to a 2 during an underflow. So I think what's supposed to happen is this is being pushed across on a spring. When the machine rotates to carry out the underflow, which is position 2, which is where it is now, I think this is supposed to pop across all the way and then engage behind this lever where it is now, so that when this continues to rotate, this lever is now held captive by the spring pressure on here, and then when this rotates, it will go from a 2 to a 1. It will undo the underflow, and then it should terminate the cycle when it gets back to 0, because this latch has been delatched in effect. I think that's how it's supposed to work. Now what I can't figure out is, obviously there's something missing here, because this is just being pushed so far across where it is now and stopping, so it's never going to go any further than this. So there's some mechanism or spring or something missing from here. Now we've got this post here, and there are wear marks down at the bottom of it, so I think there's something supposed to go on this post that's meant to hold this up, because obviously this needs to be sprung upwards, otherwise it's just going to flop down. When even with the front panel on, it's not going to be held up into position. So this, in theory, I think should be sprung upwards, and also there should be some kind of spring force pushing this across. It shouldn't be a solid single press, otherwise it's just going to bind up as soon as the carriage gets to the end. So I don't know if this plate's damaged or there's something missing off it, or if there's other parts under here. I've taken this off and had another look, and I can't see any parts that are missing or anywhere they would have fitted, but obviously there's something amiss here. Now there is a mark here looking like something used to engage with it, so whether or not there's a lever missing, I suspect this spring isn't supposed to go here, but I've got a feeling there's a mechanism of some sort that's missing off here, but I don't know what it is. So if anyone's got one of these machines and can take a photograph of the inside, or has a document showing a diagram of how this is supposed to be laid out, then I'd appreciate a copy of it. It's not the same as the manual version, this is the motorized version, and also I've noticed that there are 2 versions of the motorized version, and one doesn't have this plate on it, so I need to see what's meant to operate this plate. So that's where we are. It's working, apart from figuring out how to make this end of division cycle work correctly. I'll keep coming back to this, seeing how I can figure out what's going on, but I suspect I'm going to have to wait until I can get a bit more information. I don't want to make any modifications to this. We could of course make up our own version of what's meant to happen, but I'm trying to restore this, and I would prefer to make up any missing parts so that they look like the originals and that it operates in the way that it's intended to.